Today on the Eye of Power podcast, it's my great pleasure to welcome Dan Ramm, who is a new friend of mine. He had the courtesy of reaching out to me on a show he works on called Gun Stories on the Outdoor Channel and invited me and my father to be on the set for the upcoming season of that. The host is Joe Mantegna, and we had a wonderful time out in the desert of Arizona in the summer. It was hot, but it was fantastic to see how these shows are made. And this is a show that shows the stories of various sort of unusual guns throughout the ages. And it's a great show. And Joe Mantegna is the host and narrator, and they've got a team that puts the weapons through their paces. And so it's educational and interesting. And to me, what was interesting was getting to see how all of that is made and getting to know Joe a little bit and Dan a little bit. Dan's story is fantastic. He's got very successful last couple of decades in the television business and has recently put out a novel. And so that's a whole nother thing. So we'll get into talking about that. And what I want you to take from our discussion is the ways that he was able to move through outside of his comfort zone, make changes, take risks, and see how that opened new doors and new experiences for him. So help me welcome Dan Ramm to the show. Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. And I see a whole bunch of awards are like, looks like, are those Academy Awards and Emmys? And
No, it is an Emmy on the end. Joe and I were two of the
okay.
producers on a documentary for the Palm Springs Air Museum a couple of years ago. It was their 25th anniversary of the museum, and we produced a documentary about that, and that won an Emmy for best military documentary that year. The some of the other
Wow.
ones are Telly Awards for
Telly
television
Awards. Okay.
awards. So those are for some are for other documentaries we've done, and then but most of them are for my show Hollywood Weapons, Fact or Fiction, which I produced and wrote for the Outdoor Channel. We did 6 seasons so far. Who knows if there'll be a seventh? But it was sort of a MythBusters type show in that what we would do is
Okay.
we would find a scene from a TV show or movie where a weapon was used in a way that seems sort of unbelievable. And then we would test it in
Mm.
the real world under real world conditions to see does it really work that way, you know? So we did like, oh my gosh, we've done so many tests. For example, like one of our first episodes was Jaws. Not only did we want to know, does the scuba tank explode in the shark's mouth like it does at the end of Jaws? But we also added in the other factors. So we had Terry Shepard, who was our host, one of our hosts. We had him sort of lying on a beam sideways, like Roy Scheider was. He had the same exact rifle. We had created a shark's head out of fiberglass that was the right size, put the tank on it, but then we put it on a mechanical device, on a robot, so it was coming at him at the right speed. And so Terry had to, make the shot. And we're
Cool.
talking about something about the size of a pie tin, it's not big. There was multi-factor test. So spoiler alert, he did hit the tank, it did not explode.
It did not explode. Big
Did not.
shock there, right?
Yeah. But I would say it's probably pretty 50-50. A lot of the things that we tested actually did work, some remarkably well. So one of the tests that I think comes to mind that really shocked everybody that it actually did work was there's a movie called Across the Wide Missouri with Clark Gable and Ricardo Montalban. And Ricardo Montalban plays an Indian named Iron Shirt. And in the movie, he is attacking Clark Gable, who is frantically trying to load his long rifle. Trying to remember what it was now, but it was like a Kentucky long rifle type rifle, and he's run out of time, and he now aims and fires, but the ramrod is still in the gun, in the rifle. And in the movie, the ramrod shoots out, it shoots through Iron Shirt's chest and sticks out the back of him. So we tested this exactly like the film, got the same rifle. We had a ballistics gel torso, the same distance, everything. It worked exactly like the movie. The ramrod stuck right
Wow.
through, halfway out the backside of the gel torso. So that was pretty impressive.
That's pretty awesome. I want to kind of zoom out a little bit for
Sure.
to start getting into our discussion. The work in television, which to those that are uninitiated, it may seem very glamorous, and it's like, oh my gosh, television. And I got a little bit of a glimpse of it when I was with you a couple days on the set of Gun Stories, right?
Yeah.
But it is not glamorous to make these things. It's hard work. It takes the dedication of a lot of incredibly talented, masterful people at what they do. And to make it really work and make it good it's nearly magical. So I think it gets, and there's so much content, I think it gets, at least it seems to me like if you're not in that world, it seems to get a little bit lost as to the art and skill of the and the craft
Yeah.
that goes into whether it's documentary or no matter what the form is, it's still just, I was just blown away at the level of talent by everybody involved.
Yeah.
Um, what so I'm laying that out because I'm really wondering your personal path. What drove you? How did you kind of end up on the path that you're on, writing for TV shows? We'll get into your novel that's out. That's a path of passion. So I'd like to just explore that a little bit, Dan, with you, if you don't
Sure, of
mind.
course. Yeah,
Yeah.
and just quickly going back to what you said before, it's true, about the crew. Probably the most under-acknowledged part of show business is the crew. Um, Everybody, we heap accolades on the actors or maybe the director and sometimes producer, but as you saw, every aspect of making a TV show or a film is an art. The grip, the camera operator, makeup, everything is an art unto itself. And on top of all that, what makes it really successful is a cohesiveness between the people working together. When everybody can get along with each other, because remember, and it's an old cliche, they're like family. Well, the reason we all say that is because you tend to spend more time with your crew than you do with your real family. You might spend 10, 12, 15 hours a day for weeks and weeks at a time with crew. So if you don't get along, things fester pretty quickly.
And that's got to, obviously it hurts the experience of the work if you have discord, but also I got to believe that discord would make its way into the product.
It does. And it's happened, we've had one or two people on the crew that it just didn't gel for whatever reason. Nothing necessarily against that person. It's just that it just didn't gel. So we had to make a change. And, the whole idea is to keep the ship going forward.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when I look back at people say to me sometimes like, well, what's your favorite episode of this? Or what's your favorite episode of that? It's hard to say, but I can tell you the fun I had working with the people that I had, because especially when you're on location, as we were with you, you spend all day working and then you go home, you go back to the hotel and you shower, you change. What did we do? We went out to dinner with you and your dad, and hung out the rest of the evening, telling stories and talking, and all of that stuff is the best part of it to me. It's the icing on the cake, if you will. So my personal sort of journey in this whole thing is rather peculiar in that, and I've been asked, did you ever imagine yourself working in show business? Well, I can only say I guess I must have at some point, or I
Mm.
wouldn't be here. Because I'm a firm
Yeah.
believer in putting out into the universe what you want, and it can come back to you. But I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, started, at a young age working summers paper routes, and my grandparents had a grocery store. You know, you do all those things, mowing lawns, all that's, those were the GoFundMe things when we were kids, right, Tom?
Yeah, exactly.
As I got older, I started to work in construction, first as a laborer and then carpenter, etc. And then you know, after I turned 18, I moved to California, not necessarily at all for show business, but I had an opportunity to do construction out here, and I thought, wow, it never snows out there. And you know, California had this, you know, dreamy sort of thing about it. So I moved out here at the time, worked in a lot of different jobs, and I did construction for a long time, sort of moved into roofing, specialized in roofing for a long time. Had a company, grew that company. We had about 35 employees. I had a business partner at the time, but it was not something I was truly happy doing. And I sort of feel like, for me anyway, you have to step outside your comfort zone once in a while to see what's there, you know. If you're not enjoying life and enjoying what you're doing, then you gotta try, you gotta do something. So I had sort of in the back of my mind decided, like, at some point this was going to be it. And during that same sort of period of time, I had gotten a call from my business from Arlene Mantegna, Joe's wife, because they needed work on their house. And I had done work for Robert Stack and Raquel Welch and like a number of celebrities. So it was nothing unusual to go to a celebrity's house. But this celebrity, for me in particular, was special because I have and still do a great admiration for Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. That's my favorite sort of music. I like all music from the Stones to the Beatles to rap, but that's my feel good place. Well, Joe had just finished the film Rat Pack for HBO, where he played Dean Martin. So I was very excited about that. Now, I had been a fan of Joe's already because I enjoyed searching for Bobby Fischer. He had done 3 Woody Allen movies, Alice, Celebrity, and something else. And he'd also done Godfather 3. So I was a fan of his already. But Rat Pack was just, that nailed it for me. Like, he was so good. Got nominated for an Emmy, got nominated for a Golden Globe. Like, he was something in that film. So that was our bonding thing. You know, we started talking about the Rat Pack and Dean Martin and Sammy, and he was, I think, because I was like probably early to mid 30s at the time. So I think he was surprised somebody in my age group was so excited by that, you know, that music and those guys. So I think that's what was our initial connection. Well, Joe owned a few rental properties at the time, so whenever he needed work done, he'd call me. And through that, we sort of became friends initially. We both shared an interest in golf, so once in a while we'd golf together, or he would go to a celebrity golf tournament. I would tag along and be his caddy or whatever, just for fun. And I had decided at some point in during this time period, I was going to sell my half of the business to my partner at the time. So part of that agreement was that I would stay for 1 year to help transition ownership to my ex-partner. Well, Joe knew about this. We didn't really talk much about it, but he was aware of what I was doing. About a month before that contract was up, we were driving back from golf, and he asked me, "What are you going to do in a month when your contract is up?" And I said, "I don't know. I might work for my ex-partner for a little bit till I figure it out, but I just know that's not what I want to do anymore, you know." And he said, "Well, I just got a pilot for a show on CBS called First Monday. It was a drama about the Supreme Court with him and Jim Garner, Charles Durning, a fabulous cast and show." And he said, "Why don't you come work for me? I'm going to start a production company, and I think I could use somebody like you." And I was like, it took me like a half a second to say yes. I didn't even ask how much. I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." And I think it was an interesting time in my life and in his life because I was ready for change. He had been doing exclusively film and theater and Broadway up until this point, because he had 2 young daughters. He could take them with him, and his wife could take them wherever they went on location, anywhere in the world. They just bring the kids with them. Well, now his kids were older and they were in school, and that becomes more difficult.
Yeah.
And CBS had been begging him to do a series for a long time, and so he finally agreed to do one. And he was ready for a change. And I think our worlds sort of collided at just the right moment, that where we felt like we could help each other, on our path. One sort of couple of interesting anecdotes is the day that we agreed on all of the terms was September 10th, 2001. The
Wow.
next day was September 11th, so we kind of never forget.
Wow.
But I do remember it took a couple weeks for, obviously, for a lot of businesses to kind of go, okay, what are we doing? The show ended up only lasting one season, and I feel pretty strongly that all of that had a lot to do with it just not catching on. There was so much distraction in the world. And then I think even the next year in '02 was the Olympics, and so that was a big distraction. It just never caught on. When the show ended, I thought that was it. And Joe said, "Why don't you stick with me? Because I got a feeling I'll get on something else," which he of course did, and then eventually ended up on Criminal Minds, and he's been doing that for the last 18 years. So all has been pretty wonderful in that respect. But another funny thing, Tom, viewers might find this funny. The first day that I worked for him, I almost quit. And the re
Really?
Yeah, and the reason why is because I get to the studio, it was Sunset Gower Studios, I remember. It's my first day, and I remember I'm a blue collar kid from Kansas City, Missouri. Now I'm on a studio lot. There's trailers, there's catering, there's people wheeling props and fake walls and people in costumes. This is like it's like a surreal moment for me. So I find his trailer and I go in and there he is, and I said, what do you need me to do for you today? And he said, "Oh, I'm glad you're here." He goes, I directed this film called Lake Boat, and I'm gonna have a screening at the Directors Guild, and I'd like you to call these people on this list and invite them to the screening." Okay, that sounds pretty easy. He gives me the list. Billy Crystal, Andy Garcia, Sid Caesar, Ann Miller. I'm like, I can't call, and these are not their agents or managers. This is their
This is
personal
them.
home phone number, probably back in 2001. And so I go like, okay, and I go up to the office and I'm like, "Hello, is Mr. Andy Garcia at home?" Because I'm so intimidated by these bigger than life people, in my mind. And I just thought, this isn't for me. This is not my world. I'm not comfortable. I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be here. A lot of self-doubt. But there was a moment during that day where I thought to myself, no, wait a second. You're here. You haven't heard anything yet. You haven't done anything wrong yet. Give it a week. Just give it a week. And if at the end of the week you feel the same way, then fine. But just give it a week. Well, by the end of the week, I felt like, you know what, I can do this. I really think I can do this.
So you
And
called that. So just in that case, so you called and talked to some of these big names, the people that
yeah,
are, intimidating, and you
yeah,
found they were very gracious and weren't the monsters that you thought, right?
exactly. And now and now some of them I know personally, and I've never told them the story, but I laugh when I think back. Like, what was I so afraid to talk to this guy for? Because you do realize that you're referencing what you said earlier about it's show business. It's so glamorous. It's so whatever. But it's a job, just like
Yeah.
any other job. You have good days. You have bad days. You get frustrated. You get angry. You want certain things that you can't attain. Whatever. It's still a job. Yeah, it's different, and there are things about it that are really sort of special and exciting. You do get to see and meet people that you never thought you would. But at the end of the day, it's still a job like any other job.
I don't have too many experiences with celebrities, but you mentioned earlier our dinner together with my father and Joe and you and me. That didn't feel to me like a celebrity dinner. That felt to me like four people just talking, getting to know each other. It was one of those magical evenings where we got a table on a we were alone because we didn't want to be where the live music was because we couldn't
Right.
talk. So we went out and got served on the terrace
Yeah,
on a resort that's overlooking the town. The evening could not have been more perfect. We
was.
were out there by ourselves. So you couldn't even dial that up. And then we had a 2+ hour discussion where it was just, you know, everybody was engaged and had their turn, and it was wonderful.
Yeah. And Joe is a great storyteller, isn't he?
He sure is, and he's a real guy. You know,
Yeah.
he's not trying to impress you. He's just
Oh,
his attitude is, this is probably something that you'll find enjoyable, so I'll share it with you. You
yeah.
know, that's sort of how he where he's coming from. So, you know, whereas I know there's people that aren't like that, that they're actually trying to get you to think something, and that was not his vibe at all.
Well, Tom, what I've sort of found in this business is that the old adage, the bigger they are, the nicer they are. It's really kind of true. What Because I've met Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Hanks. I mean, I've met a lot of big people, and they're all very much like Joe, very sort of normal, nice people. It's the people way down on the list that really that they're legends in their own minds. They want to feel like they're important, so they try to impress upon you how important they really are, you know,
Yeah, boy, that could not be a worse strategy to try to improve things if
right?
you tried, you know, just alienate people and don't build relationships. I mean, come on. But no,
Exactly.
I get it. It's an easy trap to fall into. You know, the ego is not the best part of our beings.
No,
Well,
it's
you
not, and I'm not innocent in that.
no, no, exactly. Yeah.
I am positive that in the beginning of my career, when things started happening for me, I'm pretty sure I thought I could walk on water at one point,
Mm.
But
Well,
reality sets in. You realize like, well, wait a minute, I'm just slugging it out with everybody else here.
well, I imagine, you know, coming from Kansas City and getting into that sort of world where now you do know personally all these big names, and, you know, all the people of your past life saw you as Dan who has a roofing company.
Right.
Eh, right? And it would be nice to like kind of let people know, hey, it's not the same Dan as you knew before. So
No,
it's a very easy thing to fall into. So what do you think the path out of it? Like, why didn't that kind of mentality hold for you? Why were you able to sort of still retain the soul part of yourself?
I think that because the universe has a way of checks and balances. I think there's a there, and I if I really put some thought into it, I'm sure I could figure it out. But I'm sure there was a moment where the universe kind of slapped me and said, "Hey, relax. It's just television." You know what I mean? I just saw recently Julia Louis-Dreyfus, obviously Elaine from Seinfeld and Veep, and wonderful actress, super funny person. She was in an interview and she had just received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which is a huge accolade in Hollywood. And she said, and there I am standing, and the way they do it is they put a big sort of placeholder over the star so you can't see your star until they reveal it, right? So she said she's standing there and a couple of people spoke on her behalf and she's feeling really great about herself. And then she's standing there and they pull the cover off of the star and she looks down and she said, they spelled my name wrong. And she started laughing and she said, just when you think you're all that, the universe goes, no, you're not.
It's funny because one of the things she's so talented at is her reactions to indignities, right? In the
Yeah.
Veep character, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, throughout her career, she's got a really good reaction to the indignant. You can just
Yeah.
see it on her face, all those emotions. It's so funny.
And I remember John
Yes.
Travolta told a very funny story, similar, where he had some old sports car that he had fixed up like to mint condition, and he was driving down the road, and he thought in Hollywood, and he just thought he was it, man. He was driving this really cool car. He was a big star at the time. The engine died, and he said, and now I'm sitting in traffic, and people are honking at him, yelling at him, giving him the finger, doing all this kind of stuff. And he goes, that was my reality check. Like, you may think you're a big deal, but just try having a stalled car on Hollywood Boulevard. You'll find out you're not. So
Yeah, but then he had runways and jets on his property too. So.
true. But again, a guy I've met, super nice, super humble, very kind individual.
Yeah. Again, your perspective on that world, the more successful, the more sort of centered people are, the more they tend to be able to get out of that ego trap of trying to prove yourself in some way, or really believing that you're not worthy of it, right? Because some of it can be that where you said it yourself earlier when you were to pick up and call that list. The first thing that hit you with the self-doubt, who am I to call and talk to these people?
Yeah.
Or what are they going to say to this? They don't know me. Or we have these questions in our mind, these little voices yapping at us, trying to keep us from moving out of that comfort zone, right? And I love how you laid that out, where you said, I'll just give it a week. So you gave yourself permission to act and say, look, if it's a real disaster, like I fear it could be, then okay, we'll only have to do it for a week. So I thought that was a really good technique that you used to be able to get yourself into action.
Yeah. My father, who passed away just a couple of years ago, ever since I was a little kid, whenever there was a task or a job or something that had to be done, I think we always look at, oh my God, I have to mow this entire lawn. Like, but my dad always had this philosophy of like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so if you don't look at the entire yard, look at that section. Just cut that section first, then move on to the next section. It doesn't seem so overwhelming at that point. And that was what I sort of did that week, was like, all right, I'm just going to worry about today. And then I'm going to worry about tomorrow and the next day. And then at the end of the week, I will evaluate how these 5 days went, you know. Um, and I think too that you sort of grow out of all that sort of self-importance thing when you learn how to be grateful for the other people that are contributing to what you're doing. So I've created a couple of TV shows, and I've written for I've written for Criminal Minds, I've written some, but even the shows that I created, I never ever referred to those shows as my show. I always referred to it as our show or the show, because it is not my show. I write it, I produce it, but without all of those people, without the actors, without the makeup people and the props, and without all those people, nothing happens. So it's a group
Yeah.
effort. It really is a group effort. And when you learn to appreciate the group and be grateful for your group, and I have this thing I always do, because we tend to work intensely for periods of time, and then we may not see each other for months after that. Like Gun Stories that we did with you, like all that crew, I may not see that crew again until next April. But what I always do is, after it's all over and we're all back at home, I write everybody an email and I thank them for their hard work, and tell them how much I appreciate what they do for the show, because I think it's important that they know that I don't forget that they play an important role in what we do.
Well, there's a couple things you said there, Dan, that are sort of recurring elements of the Eye of Power, where we have these kinds of discussions. The idea of gratitude. It's often said, gratitude is next door neighbors with abundance, and some of that is what you just pointed to, that story where that feeling of gratitude leads to that reach out to let people be seen, which is another theme that comes up, where people really, that's a need. It's not like they are character flawed because they need a thank you. No, we all have the desire to be seen as the unique individual we are.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're the ones that hide it from others. When we put our minds to getting good at something, and we sort of use our unique abilities, it feels really good when somebody sees and acknowledges that. So that's a success habit. It doesn't matter what the setting is.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, this might be a good segue into your current project with your novel coming out, Long Branch. And so that's a departure, right? Because it's your first novel,
Yeah.
right? And so while you're a seasoned writer, and again, I know this because I've walked this path myself. Writing a novel is unlike any other kind of writing. It's a whole new ball game. And
Absolutely.
while the elements of it, if you have a command over the language and you can express yourself through the written word, is very helpful, it's still it's like a pile of spaghetti that you have to try to fit through. And you move one thing and you moving sort of a 3D puzzle, And
Yeah.
so it's a tremendous amount of work. So I just wanted to kind of get your view of your process through that and how you got to the place you were. You told me a little bit, but I want to share it with the audience.
Well, it's funny. It kind of happened by mistake. One of the networks that I had done a lot of work for towards the tail end of COVID, like maybe the summer of 22, somewhere in there, if I recall right, they had mentioned to me that they were interested in doing a scripted drama. They had never done a scripted drama on their net. It was the Outdoor Channel. They had never done a scripted show on their channel and were interested in doing that. So they asked me and Joe to pitch them some ideas. So we pitched them some ideas, and I pitched them this show about this character in this book. It wasn't a book then, but it was a character and it was an idea that I had had. So I pitched them the idea and they sort of liked it. And they said, well, could you write up a synopsis? And I said, sure, which is basically, you write up like a 1 or 2 paragraph description of what you think the show is going to be. And then if they like it, they have you write up a longer one, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote up a synopsis, but when I started to write the synopsis, I found that it was coming out more like a novel, more like way too descriptive for a synopsis. And after I got to the second page, I thought, what am I doing? This is not what they want. I know this is not what they want. So I put that aside and I wrote up the short synopsis that I knew they wanted. They sort of liked it and they said, well, can you tell us more? And so we had a phone conversation about it. And ultimately they decided to pass on it. But I couldn't get it out of my mind.
Okay.
And I sort of have this thing where if I every day if I wake up and I'm still thinking about this idea, then I got to work on it. I got to write it out, see what happens. Now, as you said, I had never written a novel. It's a completely different animal. Obviously, television and film, it's a very visual media. So you can use brief descriptions. You can just sort of, let your imagination run wild when you're writing a script because other people will contribute. When you say it was a dirty musty hotel room, that's all I need to say. The set deck and the prop guys are going to make it look like a dirty musty hotel room. So the other thing about television writing is that you have all these filters that you have to write through. Is what you're writing going to cost a lot of money? Who would be the actors? What are the locations? Is it a period piece? Like all these things are factored in to whether or not it's going to work or not. Well, with a book, as you know, it can be anything you want. There are no restrictions. I found that extremely liberating. So I started to work on this idea, and I told no one except my wife because part of me was I didn't want to brag to the world like, hey, I'm writing a novel, and then get to page 75 and go, hey, I'm not writing a novel because I don't know what to do next. And then the other part of it is I'm a firm believer in not everybody you know is your friend, and not everybody you know is rooting for you. And the moment you share your dream with somebody, if they're not really rooting for you, you're going to get negativity. And you don't need that in life or as an artist or, as a construction worker. You don't need any negativity. Don't tell me I can't do it. I already have enough self-doubt. So I told no one. Then we get into the holidays. I'm still working on it, and I'm working on it a little bit every day. Sort of at the end of my day, I'll spend an hour or two working on it. Still curious in my own mind, like, well, what's going to happen next? And then, of course, there was the writer's strike the next year, which stopped everything, and I had more free time to work on it. So I finished my first draft, and my wife reads it. She loves it. I have a couple other friends read it. They love it. I have Joe read it. He loves it. Okay, maybe I have something. So I hire an editor, Cara Highsmith, wonderful editor, who, because as you say, formatting and all that stuff is like nothing like screenplays. I can format a script, but I can't format a book. So she helped me immensely with that and finding all my little typos and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, when she was done, she said to me, I really think this is a good book and I'd like to introduce you to an agent. And I said, great. So the agent read it. He really liked it. And he said, I'm confident that I could sell this book for you. but big publisher, first time novelist, it's probably not going to go out. If you're lucky, 2 years from now, it'll get published.
Yeah.
And they may not even put any money behind it. And he said, if I were you, I would really consider self-publishing. Then you're in control of it. You're in control of your sales. You're in control of marketing. And you'll make a little bit more for each book you sell than through a publisher. So that's what I decided to do because I didn't write this book because I thought, oh, I'm going to make a fortune as an author. I wrote it because I was very excited about the story. I was passionate about the idea. And also, I like to try to step out of my comfort zone once in a while and see if I can do it. Before I started working for Joe, before I even knew Joe, I had written a screenplay about Sammy Davis Jr. I'd read his autobiography and I was so moved by it that I thought, I wonder if I could write a screenplay. So I bought a book by Sid Field on screenwriting and I bought some software and I sat down and I used my two index fingers and I typed out this script that after I'd been working for Joe a couple of years, I said, would you look at this? And I could see the look in his eye, like, okay, so now the guy thinks he's a writer. But but to Joe's credit, again, stepping out of my comfort zone, to his credit, he read it and he said to me, you know what, this is pretty good. Is writing something you want to do? Now, not only had no one ever asked me that question before, I had never even asked myself that question before.
Wow.
And it
Wow.
was a moment for me. I sort of thought about it and I said, I think it is. So he said, great, give me a couple weeks. So he took that script, went through it with a red pen and marked all the things that he wanted to put my attention on, like this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, put this in the third act, all those kind of notes, which was incredibly helpful. And then at the same time, he had me start reading all these scripts that had been submitted to him. And I said, well, I don't know anything about that. He said, you know what a good story is, right? If you read a good story, tell me. Okay. So I started reading scripts for him. Now cut to 20 some years later when I write this novel, I go to him with the first printed manuscript, and I had made the mistake when I had it printed of only have it printed on one side of the paper. So the thing was
Oh,
like War and Peace, like it was so thick, twice as thick, obviously, as it needed to be. And so when I handed it to him, his eyes got big, almost the same look as when I handed him that script 20 some years ago. He goes, oh my God, what is that? And I said, well, I wrote a novel. He goes, you wrote a novel? And I said, yeah. And I said, when you get time, look at that. And he did. And he came back to me and he said, this is great. You really should think about getting this published. So that's kind of how it all happened. And now it's out and people are loving it. I'm getting great reviews. It's selling well. I had a man I know named Bob called me just a few days ago, and I don't know him well, but I've met him at different fundraising events, and he had bought the book. He called me up and he said, I can't believe how good your book is. He goes, I love mystery novels. And what I do when I read a mystery novel is when I'm reading, I write down on a piece of paper what I think is going on and then I date it. He goes, do you know I tore that paper up 4 times reading your book? I could never figure out what was really going on until you reveal it towards the end of the book. And I was like, well, great. You know, so that's
That's
been
awesome.
the big response is nobody can seem to figure out what's happening in the book until they're supposed to.
That's wonderful. I mean, that and to be able to achieve that on your first try is really something. That's a heck of an accomplishment.
Yeah,
And
I couldn't be more thrilled.
that's awesome. So did that get a new passion? Is that something you want to like? Do you have a sequel or another story burning a hole in your brain that you want to
I
pursue down the road?
Yeah, actually, yeah, because what happened was as I was writing the book, I got to this certain point and I wanted to keep going, but I thought, oh no, it is going to be as thick as War and Peace. So
Yeah.
I got to end it now. So I've already started writing the second book, which because I'm a big fan of Robert Parker and his Spencer books and Jesse Stone books. Like I love the idea of serializing these characters into a few books would really be wonderful, I think. And the a lot of the people who read it, I sort of tease at the end that there might be a second book, and everybody's like, I can't wait for the second book. I got to know what happens after this.
Yeah. That's
So
cool.
yeah, I mean, who knows? I have this fantasy that some studio or producer is going to come along and say, this would make a great TV series. And I'll be like, really? I never thought of that. What a good idea.
Well, you probably, my guess is, because I mean, again, the parallels between your experience and mine, not trying to put myself at the level of achievement you have there, but I started my creative writing was screenplays. When you started talking about you picked up the books, I have a series of like a whole shelf of books and
Yeah.
try to learn how to write screenplays, and I can totally relate to the software, the formatting, and all
Oh,
that.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then the novel was something different. But what I think it did is my approach to writing the novel was I was looking through the screen, like what would happen, like it's a visual style. And my guess is yours is probably similarly framed because of your previous experience. And the benefit of that, of course, I mean, is that true? Would you say?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it reads, what I keep hearing from people is it's an easy read, it's a fun read, it's a quick read. There is a lot of dialogue in it because I feel like I'd rather the characters, I guess that comes from my screenwriting, but I'd rather the characters be developed through what they say than me telling you who they are, why they are the
Sure,
way they are.
sure.
I think that when you read something, I think you learn a lot more about a person through their words than their actions.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's a lot of that in the book.
It's funny you say that because a lot of times people say it the other way around. You know, it doesn't matter what you say, it matters what you do, right? So you can look at it either way, I guess. And
Yeah, I mean, I
certain,
think when it comes to writing, it's reading, it's different. I think
yeah,
you
yeah.
read what a character says and you think, wow, that's cool, when I'm sure when you whoever read whenever you read the Godfather book the first time and you read, I'm going to make an offer you can't refuse, like, well, that tells you everything you need to know about this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. When you hit that level of skill and be able to get, those perfect words in the perfect scenario, that's where it really gets great.
Yeah.
But it seems to me like then your idea or dream of somebody being able to read your written, the novel form and being able to see it on screen,
Yeah.
um, is probably, you know, it's, it's my guess is that people will think that. I know some
Yeah.
of because a lot of the feedback I got for mine is, oh, I could really see this as a movie. I could really see
Yeah.
this because that was sort of the approach of how I was thinking as I was writing,
Sure.
um, because of that background. So I imagine it's something similar to that. So it sounds something else that I'm picking up from the way you're describing your journey, Dan, is you seem to be less focused on outcomes and more focused on process. Is that something is
Yeah.
rings true or?
100%. Because I like to write whatever I write, I like to write something that I would enjoy reading or watching. I don't try to write for the market, quote unquote, or for the audience necessarily. I just think like, man, I would watch this TV show or I would read that book. That's all you can do because you never know what's going to resonate with an audience. You don't know what they're going to connect with. But if you're at least authentic in what you're doing, and you care about it and you like it, it might have a chance. And so far, that's worked out pretty well for me. I think one of the things that Joe said to me early on was, it's a Hollywood is a very calloused business. And you have to really believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, how do you expect anyone else to believe in you? And that
Mm.
made a lot of sense to me. Like you gotta really believe that you can push that self-doubt away as much as you can. Because art is very subjective, no matter what it is, a book, a painting, a television show. What you may find funny, I may not. What you find dramatic, I may not. So you can't write for the audience. You just have to write something that you think is a good story that you would enjoy reading, put it out there, and hope people connect with it.
I love that. That's fantastic. I mean, that because that leads to the authenticity, right? That's the expression of you rather than some sort of role you're playing or caricature, or it doesn't have the first casualty is that connection to genuine experience.
Yeah, and and this book, what's funny is it's the main character is a guy named Mason Powell. And Mason is like a combination of a lot of actor friends that I have. Because as I said before, the business can be tough, and actors and actresses can get sort of in this rut where they have great success and then they can't get a job for some reason after that. Sometimes it's typecasting. I often use the Bob Denver from Gilligan's Island. He was Gilligan, and that was it. Like after that show ended, what else did Bob Denver do? Not a lot, because he was so identifiable with that character. Why? Because he played it so well. Unfortunately for him, in a way. So Mason is one of those guys. He had a very successful television show on a major network for about 12 years where he played the sheriff of an old west town. When that show ended, he couldn't really parlay that into like another series or films or anything else. So he had made decent money during that time period. He had residuals coming in, so it was okay. And he started doing autograph signings and fan shows and appearances, those kinds of things, which can be also extremely lucrative for certain people. I think Barbara Eden for I Dream of Jeannie, she's still out signing autographs and making a lot of money doing it. So he that's what he's doing. And then COVID hits, that all dries up for almost 2 years. It starts to open back up again. These fan shows start up again. And when he goes out, everything's different. The attendance is way down. People are not as excited. We all had different priorities after COVID. Everything's different. I won't go into how or why, but he finds himself in a financial situation where it's dire. And what he decides is he's going to go back to his hometown of Long Branch, Georgia, and has a plan to make a lot of money quickly, come back to LA, restart his career. And it's while he's there that he finds himself mixed up in a mystery that is 30 years old and that he may have a part in himself unknowingly. And that's
Wow.
kind of where it goes off the rails for him. So that's my long way of telling you that Mason is actually a little bit of me too. I put a little bit of myself. I Mason overthinks things a little bit, which I do. There's even a moment in here where he sort of witnessed to a pretty horrific car accident that actually happened to me. I was driving to my office one morning. It was a horrible car accident. I helped this woman get out of her minivan that had been turned over. So I
Wow.
put that in the book because they say write what you know. So
Yeah, I can relate in the sense that, the characters do end up being pieces of you because that's the only lens we have is our own, our own perspective. And you
yeah,
try to borrow and you talk to people. And that's also another wonderful thing about the shared artistic media where, you have a production with a team and everyone gets to contribute, or a team of writers for a show or something like where it
yeah,
starts getting kind of, and it changes it. It's like a single vocalist versus an orchestra or something like that. It's all expression and it's all, meant to what? Further our understanding of this crazy journey we have through this world, right? I mean, that's what it all
absolutely.
comes down to.
Well,
Yeah.
the
So,
town, I mean, the town of Long Branch, Georgia is really a town called Hamilton, Georgia, which is
okay.
about 2 hours south of Atlanta. It's near Warm Springs, Georgia, which is where Roosevelt had his sort of summer home.
Okay.
But I had gone there. It's a very small town, maybe 1,500 people or so. I had gone there about 4 times over the course of a year because I was doing a TV show there. And I just fell in love with this town. It's such a beautiful place, first, such a stark contrast from Los Angeles. I mean, everything's green and there's trees and there's water. We don't have any of that in LA. The people were super friendly and very folksy and down home. And maybe it's my Midwest upbringing, but I really connected with these people. And so, that's the town in my mind that I sort of used for the book. Some of the people that live there are sort of represented in the book in different ways. That show only lasted one season, but now I sort of look back and think, the real reason I was there and the real reason that all happened to me is so I could have that in my mind for this book.
To anybody listening to us, they have a similar sort of catalog of experiences that they and only they have,
Yep.
at least if you look at it in its totality and from their particular vantage point, then it's a matter of what you do with it. I mean, writing a extended form is not necessarily for everybody,
Yep.
but communicating with people or serving people in a way, or just hearing somebody's story and hearing them in a way that only you could have, and giving them a kind word or a support that tells them that they were heard and seen, right? And so that's a business we can all be in more intensively. And so it's maybe writ large when we do it on the big screen or in a book
Yeah.
that can live beyond ourselves. That's what's nice about those forms, but it's true in our everyday lives. And it seems to me is a universal thing. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think storytelling in general, I mean, let's face it, before television, before radio, that's how we kept our history alive. I mean, we have books back then, but families would tell stories about grandpa, grandma, how they traveled across the West and settled in California or fought the British, during the Revolutionary War. Those stories were told and passed on, and
Yeah.
that's how we know about our past mostly.
Do you have anything more to add for us before we sort of wrap it up, Dan? You got
Well, I mean, I think the book is available on Amazon. It's available on in Kindle format, print format. It's available on Barnes and Noble. And by the time this airs, it will be an audio book
wonderful.
read by Mr. Joe Mantegna.
Oh, that's wonderful. That was one of the things I was going to ask you, whether you were going to get Joe to read it for you. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, it'll be out.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate you being with me today. I knew it'd be a fun conversation and you did not disappoint. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Say hi to your dad for me,
I sure will.
and uh, and be well.
Thanks so much. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being with me today. It's a pleasure to be with you as it has been in the past. And I loved what you shared with us today. I think I might call this the story of roofing to writing, where, there's probably a lot of roofers out there, or, something similar to that, that may have sort of a dream of something else they might do. And while you didn't necessarily dream of being a writer or a novelist per se, you were able to be there in the moment. Were able to be somebody who connected with, in this case, Joe Mantegna, but there's no telling who you might be able to connect with and form a new relationship in your life that opens up doors and takes you to places that you might not have ever thought to go. And I think that one of the things that I learned from Dan today is being in the moment and being in the process, right? Looking at how we're working in the moment more than, well, I want to make this thing happen, so I'm going to do everything that happen. Which I'm not necessarily going to put that down. Setting goals and having big dreams is certainly part of life and a legitimate one. But when we can fall into a trap there if we don't necessarily understand that life is a journey. It's better when we develop the skill and habit of enjoying the step we're on. And so we want to be able to maybe segment that up. And one of the things Dan shared that I think was really insightful was one of the ways that he's able to do that. So, for instance, when Joe first gave him the list of people, so he was acting essentially as a producer, a junior producer, where he had to call a list of people to see if they wanted to be involved in this project. You've never done it before, it's going to seem a little daunting. And the way he dealt with that was he said, okay, I'll give it a week. I'll run through this mucky water that doesn't feel too comfortable, but I'll only have to do it for a week. If it's too horrible after that, then I can just set it down and try something different. Then he found that, oh, it really wasn't mucky water after all. It was actually much better than he thought. And he also found out that he could do it. And so that's something that I think echoes in all of our lives. We all have experiences like that. And so let's keep that in mind the next time we want to move out of our comfort zone. So I think that's a great takeaway from Dan's story. The other thing is the importance of gratitude. I mean, we've talked about that a lot in the Eye of Power. I can't emphasize that enough to know. Another one he shared I loved was not everybody's rooting for you. And you think they are, and they think they are. But if they're not fully integrated, if they don't have all of themselves in a row, there are parts of themselves that will be envious, jealous. They don't want the challenge of you stepping outside and challenging them to have to possibly move in response. And so that can introduce what Dan said was negativity, at least sort of headwinds. And so his methodology was to just work unsung, right? Just keep it to yourself, do your thing. And once you're to a point where the negativity is not going to stop you, then you can share from there. So I thought that was great. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to underscore before I sign off is when Dan shared his screenplay, Sammy Davis story, Joe's question was a really good one. He said, "Is this something you want to do?" That is the question. He centered right in on what the main question is. So whenever you're thinking about making a change or you want to pursue your dream, that's a pretty good thing. You might think, like the knee jerk might say, of course, yeah, I want to. But maybe some of you wants to, and maybe there's parts of yourself that don't necessarily feel that way. And so that's part of what we will do with the eye of power is we figure that out together. So I think that's one of the most powerful questions we can ask. Is this something you want? And the universe is going to test you. It's going to see how bad you want it. And if you want it bad enough, you're willing to pay the price that it costs. Benevolent universe, it's going to let you have it. It's not going to let you have everything, but it's going to let you have the things that you put your body and mind and soul towards. So great wisdom today. Thank you again, Dan. And thank you for being with us today on the Eye of Power podcast.
This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother Scott Dardick for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com